quite a lot to what I want to say, but I'll just, before I start, make the single point that this is a work in progress. I haven't had access to a research library or anything since I started doing this stuff. You may find significant gaps, but basically, as you can see, I want to talk about the Protestant reaction to the Japanese martyrs, and well, I'll just jump straight in. Before I get into the story as such, I'd like to look at the background, the sort of state of play, how Protestants were perceiving the Catholic goings-on in Japan, and that takes me to a Jesuit mission very different from the one that we are discussing, the one in Japan. It takes me to the Jesuit mission in England of 1580 to 81, which basically consists of two characters, the polemicist Robert Parsons and his fellow Jesuit Edmund Campion. The penalty for what they were doing was death, coming into England secretly, promulgating the Catholic faith as Jesuits. Campion paid the price. Parsons got away with it and lived to fight another day. Among his many works, Robert Parsons, in 1581, while in England, wrote something which was supposedly printed in Douay, but like many of the Catholic texts of that time, it was secretly published in England, called A Brief Censor upon Two Books, written in answer to Mr. Edmund Campion's offer of disputation. His offer of disputation, Campion's offer of disputation, known as Campion's brag to his enemies. And his enemies certainly included, Meredith, sorry, I've got, what is his name now? Hanmer, he's not particularly well known, and Chark, two not particularly well-known characters who just happened to write refutations arguing very much against this Jesuit coming and talking, or presuming to talk to the authorities. And so what we've got then is Campion making his brag. We've got the two, Hanmer and Chark, arguing against it, and we've got Parsons making his brief censor against them. So that's a little context. And what has all of that got to do with Japan? Well, Parsons is the one who, he says, to return to Mr. Campion again, because he's drifted off into other stuff, he gets back to his topic. He was coming into England, you will need to enforce that it is for practice against the state. So it's not just a religious move coming into England here, it's a political move. And the Jesuits are supposedly invading. But he says the Indies and Japan can give example that they have dealt so many years for the bringing of men to the Christian religion, disallowed by the states of those countries, and yet are no meddlers against those states, nor ever caused subjects to leave their obedience to those infidel princes. He says the same sort of following year in another publication, the King of Bungo of Japan, being a heathen, hath permitted and protected the Catholic religion in his countries these 28 years, only for the commodity he feeleth his commonwealth to receive thereof. And he concludes, the Catholic faith is essential to the maintenance, continuance, well-doing and secure establishment of a commonwealth. You have nothing to fear from us, as you can see from the experience of the Japanese. Well, the Protestants, as you might expect, didn't see it in quite that light. We get John Keltridge in May of 1581, a couple of months before Campion was detained, preaching to a captive audience, very much so, Jesuits and other Catholics who were imprisoned in the Tower of London, and he rails at them pretty much like this. What presumption was it for you to come to us? We sought you not. What arrogancy to teach us. We are not destitute of such as can instruct. What, was it because you would sow your damnable errors here as you did of late among the Japonians? A people that might have been converted, now they are infected by you. That might have seen the light, now they are blinded through you. Strong words indeed, and he goes on to say rather sweetly, I think, there be idols, Amida and Shaka, which the men of that country worship, as they were taught by you. Think you that it is unknown to us? Are we ignorant of your dealings? No, I tell you, no. It's a wonderful illustration, I think, of a very typical 17th century or 16th century discourse, early modern discourse. When in doubt, blame the Jesuits. And he winds up his this part of his diatribe with the and come you hither, and have you hope to prevail here with us? Come you hither into England, which basically underlines the point that the real focus is on matters closer to home. Japan just comes in by way of illustration. So, 1597 then. As we've learned from Dr. Rappo, we've got the Franciscans claiming the crucifixions from the beginning as martyrdoms with attendant miracles, and this is evidence of the importance of the work they're doing in Japan, while conversely, the Jesuits are denying that there had been either martyrdoms or miracles, and that the crucifixions were essentially political, resulting from the Franciscans' failure to observe the legal restraints that the Japanese had placed them under. Well, that discourse spread rapidly into Europe. We get the Franciscan version in the Relación of Francisco de Tello de Guzmán, published in Granada and Seville in 1598 and translated in short order into Italian, French and German. We get Juan de Santa Maria in 1599 and with additions in 1601, and perhaps the most influential of them all, Marcelo de Rivadeneira. And on the that's on the Franciscan side. On the Jesuit side, we've got Luis Frois, José de Rivera, Luis de Guzmán, and these are just some of the accounts. There are others. The debate raged until, well, 1608 in full strength, when the Pope gave some kind of acknowledgement and permission for the Franciscan mission. It wasn't quite what they wanted, but it was good. It calmed things down a bit. And then the persecution of Christians in 1614 largely put an end to Franciscan-Jesuit differences. But what I really want to focus on here is that it is very much a European theatre. So what, if anything, is going on in little England? It's not very encouraging, to be honest, starting from the point of view of what input they were getting from the Catholic side. Robert Parsons speaks of the Jesuits' voluntary sufferings, tortures and martyrdoms in the Indies, in Ethiopia, in Japan, in England, France and other places. Yes, that's right, Blinken, you'd miss it. And he doesn't go into any details either. And another near miss here is Frois's letters, which were translated into English around 1605, but didn't actually make it into publication. You mentioned Aubigné, and again, he wasn't published until much later on, and even he got some significant details wrong. So this is the kind of thing. And so far, looking at the database of private libraries in Renaissance England, I haven't been able to find any of those texts that I mentioned or other related texts in English libraries. So the auspices are not that good, and sure enough, when we start looking at the Protestant texts of the time, there's the Dutch Jan Huyfen. It's say the Jesuits obtained of the Pope and the King of Spain that no man might dwell in Japan, either Portingale or Christian, without their license and content, so that in all Japan there are no others, no orders of monks, friars, priests, nor any other religious persons remaining or resident there, but Jesuits alone. Now, he was writing before the event. It's all based on his experiences of some years previously, so it makes sense that he doesn't refer to the Franciscans and that he doesn't refer to the miracles, but his text is being used for years afterwards, so that we'll get, for example, in 1603, William Clark talking about that which is reported of Japan, where they keep to themselves the sole, they being the Jesuits, of course, they keep to themselves the sole dominion and will admit no other clergy, but play bishop, priest, and monk themselves. And again in 1604, we've got George Abbot saying that in Japonia of the Portingale, no man hath any authority or power besides the Jesuits. These Jesuits, he goes on to say, these Jesuits do also diligently take heed that no monk of any order, any other order, be received into those lands, also based on Jan Huyfen's account. So I think it's pretty clear that we're not really talking here at all about the Protestant response, we're talking about the lack of it. There's a little bit more, awareness a little bit later on, but essentially as usual. We continue to get Japan being used as a figure in as a rhetorical device in anti-Jesuit discourse, in accusations of a Jesuit plot to take over England. Andreas Philalethes writes of the great hopes the Jesuits have of making England a Japonian island. And even after the Jesuits have been driven out of Japan, as late as 1655 here, William Prynne is complaining that the Jesuits seek to make these northern islands a Japonian island of Jesuits and one Jesuitical monarchy. This is way after that age had been buried. Slightly more informed, at least he shows that he knows of the Jesuits' letters, although he refers to them disparagingly and doesn't give any details, John Donne, but Samuel Purchas actually making use of some of those letters, but still not getting through to the ones that are actually talking about the miracles and the martyrdom. He even gives, and this is interesting, discursively, I'll come back to this kind of thing a little bit later on, muted praise to the Jesuit mission in Japan, saying a mixed truth is better than a total error, and the labours of the Jesuits breed shame to our negligence. Overall, though, there appears to be very little significant discussion in Protestant England of martyrdoms and miracles among the Christians in Japan. And this apparent lack of information about Japan in England at this time is all the more curious, given that from 1600, the English, of course, had boots on the ground. Will Adams, an Englishman in Japan, with apologies to Sting, or if you prefer, the Harold Green version, Our Man in Nagasaki. So, according to John Nelson, Adams's Protestant descriptions of a new worldview portrayed the Spaniards and Portuguese as papist pirates, the Pope as a thief, and warned in no uncertain terms that the Spaniards were set on nothing less than world conquest based first on the conversion of subjects of foreign princes. It all sounded very familiar to threats heard during the San Felipe incident in 1597. And that kind of discourse continues. We've got the East India Company, of course, from 1613 to 23, headed by Richard Cox, a former anti-Catholic spy, of whom Timon Screech makes the point that he probably was more involved than modern scholars have given credit for in turning the Japanese authorities against the Catholics. And we've got the curious situation then of this total lack of information in England, or relative lack of information in England, coupled with some quite intensive English activity going on in Japan. And eventually, of course, Cox's letters do find their way. By 1626, editions of Purchas's Pilgrimage are getting, including letters from Cox, and we get more of the Jesuits' letters coming in from Japan, and the picture is being fleshed out a little bit more. It takes quite a long time, but the news that Japan had persecuted the Christians and banished the Jesuits did eventually start to filter through. There are more and more Catholic accounts coming in. In fact, this relative lack of Catholic input is reversed from 1619 to 1630. We've got 3 works that talk in detail about the whole thing, and of which Alexandra Walsham says, these books were expected to fall into the hands not just of committed adherents of the Church of Rome, but also of lukewarm waverers and convinced Calvinists. We've got, much of this Catholic literature had a clear intent to proselytize and go out to a Protestant readership. So, having said that, it's not really until the later part of the 17th century that these threads of historical detail and religious polemic start to weave themselves into a coherent Protestant narrative. John Evelyn's 1670 translation of Pontchâteau and Arnaud is a good example. For the Jesuits' blinded self-love, he says that no friar of any other order must be permitted to pass into England. He being our old friend Robert Parsons. They're still raking over the coals of that. And he goes on to say, for a mark of the Jesuits, thus they make nothing of ruining the church, providing it may conduce to make them masters of all. And in that context, he brings Japan in. The Jesuits were cheats and impostors who made pretense of preaching, came to raise the people and plot some treason against the emperor and the kings of Japan. The Jesuits were seditious. They were disposing the people to war, and they were persecuted and chased away as cheats and impostors. And then he goes on to argue, it cannot be said that the emperor did this out of hatred to the Christian faith, who gave permission in writing in 1593 to the Order of St. Francis to enter his empire, to found their churches, hospitals and convents, and appear publicly in their poor habit, all which, notwithstanding the persecution, continued against the society, who had but one church left at Nagasaki. So he's exploiting this rift between Franciscans and Jesuits. He's showing a sense of historical awareness and so on. In the following year, the Dutch account of Arnoldus Montanus appeared in English, noting that in 1596, he's going by the Julian calendar here, the emperor proceeded cruelly against the Christians, ordering the governor of Nagasaki to take 5 Franciscans and 3 Jesuits, and having crucified, run them through with spears. He goes on to pour scorn on the accounts of miracles surrounding this event. Concerning the miracles wrought by these priests, let him believe who, according to St. Augustine, desired and depends upon now miracles for establishment of religion already confirmed by wonders. But he goes on to list them nevertheless. And he also comments, interesting, these examples manifest sufficiently that the Japanners are not only of noble hearts, but constant resolutions, enduring the greatest tortures in their infancy with inexpressible valour, for a religion the first beginning whereof they scarce understood. For besides reading the Pater Noster, Ave Maria, and some prayers to the saints, they have little or no knowledge of either the Old or New Testament. Therefore, we may judge the Japan martyrs to be very zealous and constant. So thus, really, in effect, allowing that the Jesuits had done, from a Christian point of view, some good. And that point is taken up, my final quote here, from Richard Baxter, the Puritan, unusual Puritan. He comes out with quite a few un-Puritan-like things like this. He argues that Christianity can exist independently of the scriptures. He says, a man may be a true Christian who knoweth not that there is any scripture which is God's infallible word. And in that context, he goes on to say, in Japan, Congo, China, and other countries of the East, they, that is the Jesuits, did teach them only by creeds, catechisms, and preachings. And I remember no knowledge that they gave to most of them of the scriptures. And yet the most cruel torments and martyrdoms never before heard of, which the Christians in Japan endured, doth put all sober readers past doubt that there were many excellent Christians. So just to try and get some kind of gestalt on all of it, I made a little diagram that I hope is not too simplistic. We start off with an anti-Jesuit narrative in which Japan is cast as Jesuitized and perceived negatively, while England is Jesuit-free and perceived positively. Japan is held up as the kind of epitome of all the harm the Jesuits do. Then we get the martyrdoms of 1597 and the ensuing persecution of Christians in Japan, all recounted from varying perspectives, Franciscans, Jesuits, Dutch, the English themselves, and filtering slowly into English discourse. And over the century, the focus begins to shift away from this kind of Jesuit conspiracy narrative towards greater historical accuracy, the question of the veracity of miracles, and a recognition of the commonality of suffering. Well, as I say, it is a simplification. It's not as if the anti-Jesuit narrative completely dies out at this stage, and it's not as if the veracity of miracles hadn't been an issue from the beginning of the Reformation. It's just that there's a change in tone, a change in emphasis here, which makes me want to put that later 17th century discourse more in the context of Enlightenment discourse than in the kind of early modern context of anti-Jesuit Protestant discourse. And as I say, if you want to catch this, all right, Educational Hub, which is my domain, and Yamamoto Wilson, which is my folder within my domain, if you understand what I'm saying. Yeah, please go there. Give me a few days to get it, put it online, and it'll be there. Thank you very much.